China, the Xia, Shang, and Zhou dynasties. The history of ancient China begins with a blend of myth, legend, and archaeological evidence that slowly gives way to written history. Among the earliest dynasties that shaped the identity of Chinese civilization were the Xia, Shang, and Zhou. Together, these three dynasties formed the bedrock of China's cultural, political, and intellectual traditions. The Xia dynasty is traditionally treated as a dynasty, though its existence has long been debated. Following it came the Shang dynasty, which left more concrete evidence in the form of oracle bones, early writing, and sophisticated bronze work. The Zhou dynasty, the longest-lasting of the three, consolidated Chinese culture, introduced new political philosophies, and laid the foundation for Confucianism and Taoism, which would dominate Chinese intellectual life for centuries. The interaction between myth, history, and cultural development during these three illustrates how early China established the political and cultural framework that influenced nearly every dynasty that followed. The Xia dynasty is often considered the legendary beginning of Chinese civilization. According to ancient texts, such as the records of the Grand Historian, Shiji by Sima Qian, the Xia dynasty, founded by Yu the Great, a cultural hero who is said to have tamed the devastating flood devastated Yellow River. This legend not only explains the dynasty's origins, but also reflects the importance of agriculture and water control in Chinese life. The Yellow River Valley was prone to seasonal flooding, and the ability to control water meant survival, stability, and political legitimacy. Yu the Great's image as a flood tamer became symbolic of wise and virtuous rulership. While historians debate the Xia dynasty due to limited archaeological evidence, excavations in Erli II in Henan province have uncovered remains of a bronze culture dating back to around 1900 BCE. These show evidence of palatial structures, bronze production, and urban planning, leading many scholars to associate Erli II culture with the Xia dynasty. The Xia is the narrative of dynastic rule in China, linking political authority with moral responsibility and control over nature. A dynasty provided a model for hereditary monarchy in which leadership was passed down within a family line. This idea of dynastic succession became a permanent feature of Chinese history. Early Chinese political philosophy emphasized the ruler's moral duty to maintain harmony between heaven and earth. Later dynasties would articulate this idea more formally through the concept of the mandate of heaven. But the Xia's legends show the early roots of this belief. Yu the Great's devotion to his people, his efforts to control floods, and his establishment of hereditary succession represented an idealized form of kingship that would resonate throughout Chinese culture. In addition to its political symbolism, era marked the transition from Neolithic village life into a more centralized and stratified society. The presence of technology, urban settlements, and social hierarchy at Erli II illustrates that Erli was already moving toward complex statehood. Xia, the Shang dynasty, emerged as the first historically verified dynasty of China, lasting from approximately 1600 BCE to 1006 BCE. Archaeological evidence from Anyang, the Shang capital, provides detailed insights into Shang. One of the most important contributions of the Shang was the development of early Chinese writing. Oracle bones, turtle cells, and ox scapulae inscribed with characters used for divination form the earliest known examples of Chinese script. Priests or kings would carve questions onto these bones, heat them until they cracked, and interpret the cracks as answers from the ancestors or the gods. The inscriptions reveal not only a writing system, but also the concerns of the Shang rulers: warfare, agriculture, weather, childbirth, and communication with ancestors. The Oracle Bone script is the direct ancestor of modern Chinese characters, and its development represents one of the great legacies of the Shang dynasty. The Shang were also masters of bronze technology. Their bronze vessels, weapons, and ritual objects were among the most advanced of their time. Bronze was not only a tool for practical use, but also a symbol of political and religious power. Elaborately decorated bronze vessels were used in ancestral ceremonies, reinforcing the central role of religion in Shang society. These objects often featured Taotie motifs, mythical animal masks that symbolized mystery, spiritual, and the link between the human and divine realms. The sophistication of Shang bronze casting techniques indicates a highly organized society with specialized labor, workshop, and state control over resources. Bronze weapons, such as spears and battle axes, gave the Shang military an advantage over neighboring tribes, allowing them to expand their territory and maintain dominance. Form the heart of Shang civilization. The Shang kings were not only political leaders but also high priests who communicated with the ancestors and gods. Ancestral worship was central, as the Shang believed that deceased ancestors could influence the living, bringing blessings or misfortune depending on how they were honored. This emphasis on filial piety and respect for ancestors became a permanent theme in Chinese culture. The king's role as mediator between the living and the spiritual world reinforced his authority, and the elaborate rituals involving oracle bones and bronze vessels legitimized his power. The Shang pantheon included Shangdi, the high god, but unlike later organized religions, Shang spirituality was less about codified beliefs about that ensured harmony between heaven, earth, and human society. Social structure in the Shang dynasty rigid and hierarchical. At the top stood the king and his royal family, followed by nobles and warriors who controlled land and resources. Below them were artisans who crafted bronze, ponds, and jade, and at the bottom were peasants and slaves who provided agricultural labor. This stratification was linked to the control of bronze, as elites monopolized access to axes and tin, which were essential for producing weapons and ritual objects. Shang economy was based on agriculture, particularly millet and rice, supplemented by animal husbandry and hunting. Trade existed, but was limited in scope compared to later periods. The reliance on tribute and warfare as sources of wealth did the dynasty's heuristic and hierarchical nature. As the Shang dynasty declined, and external actors paved the rise of the Zhou. Around 1046 BCE, the Zhou, originating from the western regions, defeated the Shang at the Battle of Miuye. The Zhou justified their conquest by introducing one of the most influential concepts in Chinese history, the mandate of heaven. According to this doctrine, heaven, Tian, granted the right to rule to just and virtuous rulers. If a dynasty became corrupt, oppressive, or unable to maintain order, it lost the mandate, and rebellion against it was justified. This idea legitimized the Zhou's victory over the Shang and provided a framework for understanding cycles in China for the next 2 millennia. The mandate of heaven emphasized the moral responsibility of rulers, reinforcing the idea that political authority was conditional upon virtue, not merely hereditary. Zhou dynasty, lasting from 1046 BCE to 256 BC, the longest dynasty in Chinese history. It is often divided into 2 major periods: the Western Zhou, 1046 to 771 BCE, and the Eastern Zhou, 770 to 256 BCE. During the Western Zhou, the dynasty established a feudal system in which land was granted to nobles in exchange for loyalty and military service. This decentralized structure allowed the Zhou to govern a vast territory, also sowed the seeds of future instability as powerful lords gained autonomy over time. The Zhou kings maintained authority through ritual ceremonies and their role as mediators between heaven and earth. Like the Shang, the Zhou continued the tradition of ancestor worship and ritual bronze vessels, but they also expanded the use of iron, which gradually replaced bronze as the dominant metal. The Eastern Zhou period marked by fragmentation and conflict, but also by cultural flourishing. It is further divided into the Spring and Autumn period, 770 to 476 BCE, and the Warring States period, 475 to 221 BCE. Despite the political chaos, this of China's most influential philosophies, Confucius, 551 to 479 400 BC, living during the Spring and Autumn period, articulated ideas about morality, social order, and government that would shape Chinese civilization for centuries. His teachings emphasized filial piety, ritual propriety, benevolence, and the cultivation of virtue. Confucianism became the ideological backbone of the Chinese state, especially from the Han Dynasty onward, but its roots lay in the Zhou period amid instability. Taoism, attributed to Laozi, also emerged during this time, offering a contrasting vision that envisioned with nature, spontaneity, and withdrawality, rigid social structures. The play of Confucianism and Taoism reflects the intellectual vibrancy of the Eastern Zhou era. Technological and cultural of the further illustrate their role in laying the foundations of Chinese civilization. Ironworking became widespread, leading to improved agricultural tools, weapons, and productivity. The spread of iron plows, for example, allowed farmers to cultivate more land, to support larger populations. Advances in warfare, including the crossbow and cavalry, transformed military tactics. Culturally, the Zhou produced important texts such as the Book of Songs, a collection of poetry that reveals much about everyday life, rituals, and values. Ritual music, literature, and historical records also flourished. The Zhou calendar system and astronomical observations reflected their interest in harmonizing human activity, cosmic patterns. These developments show that the Zhou period, despite its instability, was a crucible of intellectual, technological, and cultural growth. Legacy of the Xia, Shang, and Zhou dynasties is profound. The Xia provided the mythic and symbolic foundation for dynastic rule. The Shang introduced early Chinese writing, bronze technology, and religious traditions centered on ancestor worship. The Zhou articulated the mandate of heaven, developed a feudal political structure, and nurtured the philosophical traditions of Confucianism and Taoism. Together, these dynasties established the essential elements of Chinese civilization: a dynastic political system justified by moral authority, a writing system that endured for millennia, a deep reverence for ancestors, technological achievements in bronze and later iron, and intellectual traditions that would guide Chinese thought for centuries. The endurance of these ideas demonstrates the remarkable continuity of Chinese civilization, where ancient foundations remained relevant even as dynasties rose and fell over thousands of years. The debate over the Xia dynasty's existence continues to fascinate historians and archaeologists. Unlike the Shang and Zhou, whose material cultures are clearly identifiable, the Xia is a gray area between legend and archaeology. Ancient Chinese historians such as Sima Qian placed the Xia at the beginning of the dynastic cycle, ruling for nearly 500 years before the Shang. Yet the absence of direct written records from that era complicates matters. The discoveries at Erlitou, however, have strengthened the case for associating this culture with the Xia. The Erlitou site reveals urban palaces, tombs, and evidence of bronze metallurgy. Large ceremonial buildings indicate centralized political authority, while the discovery of jade artifacts suggests ritual practices consistent with later days. Some scholars argue that even Erlitou was not. It represents a proto-state that laid the groundwork for later dynasties. The Xia, legendary or historical, embodies the Chinese tendency to root political in antiquity. By tracing dynastic origins to a semi-mythical era, later rulers reinforced the idea that authority was part of a divine and unbroken tradition, stretching back to the dawn of civilization. The Shang dynasty provides a clearer picture of early Chinese life, thanks to the survival of oracle bone inscriptions and material remains. At the heart of Shang society was the king, who held both political and authority. The king's role as the intermediary between the gods and the people made his leadership indispensable. Kings frequently consulted oracle bones to guide decisions on matters ranging from warfare to agriculture. Questions inscribed on these bones, such as whether rain would fall or if a military campaign would succeed, reveal both political and spiritual concerns of Shang rulers. That more than 100,000 oracle bones have been discovered provides historians with a remarkably detailed record of Shang political and religious life. This practice also reflects the growing sophistication of written language, from simple pictographs into more complex logographs. Continuity of Chinese script from the Shang era to the present day illustrates one of the most remarkable aspects of Chinese civilization. Its ability to preserve linguistic and cultural traditions across society was not only religiously complex but also militarily powerful. The Shang kings commanded armies composed of thousands of soldiers mobilized for campaigns against neighboring tribes. Bronze weapons, chariots, and disciplined tactics gave the Shang an advantage. The chariot, likely introduced through contact with Central Asia, became a symbol of elite power and a crucial tool in battle. Warfare, however, was not solely about conquest. It also reinforced social hierarchy. Captives taken in battle were often sacrificed in elaborate rituals that honored ancestors and the gods. Archaeological excavations have uncovered mass graves containing human sacrifices, reflecting the Shang belief in appeasing supernatural forces through blood offerings. While disturbing to modern sensibilities, these practices reveal the intensity of the Shang worldview, in which the spiritual and material realms were deeply intertwined. Daily life during the Shang Dynasty was shaped by social stratification. The ruling elite lived in walled palaces and enjoyed access to luxury goods such as jade, ivory, and fine ceramics. Artisans and craftspeople were essential to the dynasty's success, producing the bronze vessels, weapons, and ornaments that symbolize status and power. Farmers, who formed the majority of the population, labored in the fields, cultivating millet, wheat, and wheat. Agricultural productivity allowed the elite to focus on governance, warfare, and ritual. Yet, peasants bore the weight of taxation and tribute, highlighting the inequality that characterized Shang society. Slaves, captured in war, formed the lowest stratum and were used in labor or sacrificial rituals. Despite the hierarchy, the integration of craftsmanship and religion created a cohesive system in which each group played a role in sustaining the dynasty. Zhou dynasty's conquest turning in Chinese history. Unlike the Shang, whose kings derived legitimacy primarily from ancestor worship, Zhou introduced the mandate of heaven, which framed political authority in moral and cosmic terms. This doctrine had profound implications. It suggested that rulers were not divine by birth, but rather stewards chosen by heaven based on their virtue. A ruler who governed unjustly or failed to maintain harmony could lose heaven's favor, thereby justifying rebellion. This belief introduced a cyclical view of history, where dynasties rose, prospered, declined, and fell, only to be replaced by a new ruling house that claimed the mandate. The mandate of heaven not only legitimized Zhou rule, but also provided future Chinese dynasties with a framework to justify their authority. For example, when the Han overthrew the Qin, or when dynasties replaced their predecessors, they invoked the mandate to explain the transition. Political was based on a feudal system that distributed land among loyal nobles and kin. This system allowed the Zhou to govern a vast territory, but also created challenges. Local lords enjoyed considerable autonomy, collecting taxes, maintaining armies, and often pursuing their own interests. Over time, the central authority of the Zhou kings weakened as powerful states emerged, leading to the fragmentation that characterized the Eastern Zhou period. Despite this decline in political unity, the Zhou era was one of the most intellectually fertile in Chinese history. The disunity and conflict of the Spring and Autumn and Warring States periods, flourishing of philosophical schools, collectively known as the 100 Schools of Thought. These intellectuals sought to answer fundamental questions about governance, morality, and the nature of society. Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism were the three most influential philosophies to emerge during this time. Confucius emphasized moral cultivation, respect for tradition, and the importance of virtuous leadership. His vision of society was hierarchical, but based on ethical relationships rather than brute force. Confucius taught that rulers should lead by example, embodying such as benevolence, righteousness, and propriety. If rulers were virtuous, their subjects would follow naturally. This emphasis on moral leadership contrasted with the more pragmatic philosophy of legalism, which emerged during the Ming States period. Legalists argued that human nature was inherently selfish and that strict laws and harsh punishments were necessary to maintain order. While Confucius appealed to ethics, emphasized the power of institutions. Taoism, attributed to Laozi, offered a third perspective, encouraging individuals to live in harmony with the Tao, or the natural way, valued simplicity, spontaneity, and withdrawal from